Some things are hidden in plain sight, and the rescue mission of Jesus is hidden both obviously and subtly in his name. It's no secret that the name Jesus carries meaning, and that meaning is God saves, or the Lord is salvation. So if we know that, and if more importantly, if everyone around the time of Jesus already knows that, where is the hiddenness? Where's the subtlety in something as unsubtle as calling the Saviour of the world God saves? Well, on the one hand, yes, Jesus' mission is blatantly named in his name for all to see. It's the name the angels give to Mary to give to him. You will conceive and give birth to a son, and you are to call him Jesus. And it's in the reading in Matthew 1:25. And he gave him the name Jesus. And that name, it has the same roots as the name Joshua. Behind both Jesus and Joshua is Yeshua, which itself is a name with two parts. Yah, which is an abbreviation for Yahweh, describing God himself, and the verb Yasha, which refers to being rescued or saved. So then, when you go from Hebrew to English, you get the name Joshua. And when you translate Yeshua into Greek, the Greek used in the New Testament, and write it in English, the answer is Jesus. But at the same time, literally at the same moment in time as Jesus arrives on earth, the name Jesus was relatively common. So as well as a special name describing God's rescue, Jesus as a name was far from unusual. In fact, it was a very down-to-earth name. In the Bible, there are other examples of people named Jesus, like Jesus who is called Justus, who also sends greetings in Colossians 4, or Jesus Barabbas in Matthew 27, who was released after Jesus had been arrested. Actually, the name was so common that Jesus the Saviour is often referred to as Jesus of Nazareth to distinguish him from others. So we have to ask the question, what did the name Jesus mean for all those others with the same name? The answer is surely that it was taken to describe a general truth about God, like the name grace or joy, rather than a specific statement of the agenda to come for the one given that name. If you name a child Grace, you're not really stating that they will be the source of grace for all of us, for the entire world. You're simply picking a name, intentionally or not, that celebrates a truth about God. So what we have in Jesus is a beautiful truth hidden in plain sight, because Jesus of Nazareth is the only Jesus who would truly live up to the meaning of that name, to the rescue that we all need. God's people knew that a rescue was desperately needed, and Roman rule across their land was the most visible example of what they needed rescuing from. When you read through the accounts of the Old Testament, God's people represent us all when they demonstrate the inability to live up to godly standards, even when the consequences of not faithfully following it are so clearly set out. And as the Old Testament story progresses, there's a growing feeling that there just has to be another way, apart from the law on its own, that they and we need extra help, we need rescuing. But most people were expecting a more dramatic, more noticeable, less subtle start to the rescue than a baby born to an obscure couple in Bethlehem. And the vital thing is, you have to get close and personal to this Jesus to get the rescue. It's a personal rescue, given personally, offered personally, and for each of us to accept personally. Here in the grounds of Salisbury Cathedral, there are some important pieces of artwork just temporarily here, looking at different environmental issues, including this piece here, looking at coastal erosion. Now I want to use this scene, picture the coastal scene here, and convey another real story of danger that happened on the coastline. I was on holiday and I found myself watching what turned out to be a really dramatic scene. There were some people co-steering along the coastal rocks. Do you know what co-steering is? You make your way across the rocks, but sometimes you have to swim, and mostly you have to climb, traversing along the rocks by the coastline. But there were 4 or 5 people who found themselves seriously stuck on the rocks. The sea was getting too rough for them to navigate, and the waves were crashing straight into the rocks that they found themselves on, and the tide was coming higher and higher. And they were in a cove, which meant that hundreds of us could see them, but we couldn't get to them. And they were in serious trouble. And of course, this is a holiday destination. So among the hundreds of people who were watching this, someone had obviously called for the rescue boat. And sure enough, the RNLI boat came in among the waves. But what happened next was not what we were expecting. We were expecting the boat to come to them and it would be easy. They would jump into the boat, job done. But the main rescue boat could only get to a certain level of closeness to them, but it couldn't actually get to them. So as we're watching, we're wondering what would happen. And then from there, from that main rescue boat, a smaller boat, a dinghy which had been on board, left that and got a bit closer to them with 2 people on it. But still, that dinghy couldn't get close enough to rescue them. It couldn't quite get close enough to get the job done. And then from that little dinghy, one person with a rope tied to himself jumped into the water and got right up to them. And we could hear him shouting, "I'm here, jump to me, jump to me." And one by one, they jumped into the water and they were safely grabbed by him, and he took them to the dinghy, and from the dinghy to the rescue boat, and one by one, they were all rescued. Our message at Christmas is that our rescuer comes to us. He comes down to earth to us, actually. He has made the move that we couldn't make. But actually now it's for each of us to make our move, to accept the rescuer and the rescue, to jump in. So at Christmas we celebrate God's rescue. We celebrate God keeping his promises, but we recognise that he does so in unexpected and personal ways. Throughout the Gospels, surprising people with the unexpected was something of a trademark for Jesus. So it's fitting that this unexpected element starts with a surprisingly subtle name, with the truth of the rescue hidden in plain sight. It's amazing actually that God can totally fulfill his promises and still do so in unexpected ways. There's a lesson for us all here, I hope. Even when we call on God for help, we can so easily fill in the details for God and write our own scripts as to how exactly the help we're seeking should play out. In my everyday situations, when concerns and challenges come up at work, I'm invited to join in his rescue story, not write my own. In my relationships, in anything I'm facing in fact, with the needs of those closest to me or those I hardly know, it's so easy for me to not just call on God, but to tell him how to answer. There is something in the Christmas story that reminds me to lay all that aside, my preferences and ideal timings and my methods, and trust him. Trust the Master's plan.